And I'm going to call to order the mobile meeting is not here yet, but okay. Um, Is he on his way?
Who are we?
Yes.
Yes, he's on his way.
Supervisor Ashley.
What I think we'll do is, let's see, we have
We have a quorum.
enough members to start a quorum. We'll proceed because one of the problems that we have is we have someone who's coming right after us, and if we don't get started and over with, it throws them off. So we will go ahead and proceed, and I call to order. I think that we have Supervisor Solis and Mayor Pro Tem Mitchell,
Yes.
Mayor McCollum, and is Mr. Lou, Dr. Lou there?
No, he's
He
not
will
here.
not be attended.
So we will have, we have a quorum. Call to order the meeting itself of May 18th for the Mobile Source Committee. I think first up, we have a presentation by Zurich, an update of the recent public fleet vehicle survey.
Thank you, Dr. Tucker. Good morning, everyone. I will provide an update on a recent survey that district staff has been conducting on public fleet vehicles over the last 2-3 months. As a way of background, there are 7 public fleet rules that district has adopted over the last, actually, a lot of them are older, but since 2000, we have 7 public rules that affect various categories of on-road motor vehicles, including light and medium-duty vehicles. These are passenger cars, pickup trucks, small vans, and so forth. The Rule 1191, for instance, requires all the new purchases to be cleanest burning gasoline, actually what we call ULEV vehicles that would meet ULEV standards or cleaner. And there are also a number of other rules that affect various categories of heavy-duty vehicles, such as transit buses, refuse collection vehicles, commercial airport access vehicles that provide passenger transportation, school buses, and sweepers, as well as other heavy-duty public fleet vehicles. I'll go over some of the requirements just for the benefit of everyone. The fleet rules essentially require the fleet operators, public fleet operators, and also private contractors that provide services to public agencies to purchase either alternative fuels or cleaner burning gasoline vehicles, depending on the vehicle classification and the rules that we have in our books. For instance, for transit buses, all the new purchases will be required to be alternative fuels. Same thing for refuse collection vehicles and school buses. For sweepers as well, alternative fuels would be required as new purchases. For some other categories, like medium-duty vehicles, again, there are provisions to allow purchases to be cleanest burning gasoline vehicles. And I'll touch on these a little bit more in my presentation. As I mentioned, the fleet rules actually apply to public fleets that have 15 or more vehicles that they own or operate or lease, and also it would apply to private fleets that provide services to these public agencies under contractual or exclusive agreements. As I mentioned already, the requirements for new purchases only to either be alternative fuels or cleanest burning gasoline vehicles, and there are also provisions for some heavy-duty categories to apply for exemption if alternative fuel vehicles are not technically or operationally feasible for specific applications. So over the last 18 years, we've received a number of applications from cities and agencies that have demonstrated to us for various reasons some of these alternatives are not feasible, and we have given them exemption over the years. So the purpose of the survey was to get a more current picture of the fleet vehicles that are operated by California public agencies that are subject to our district fleet rules. Some of the prior surveys that we had conducted were at least 10 years old, if not older, and they did not cover all the categories. So we wanted to get a more current snapshot of our public fleet vehicles that are currently operating. I should mention that there was one survey that was conducted for our school buses that was not part of our survey this time, which was done for school districts last year by our Science and Technology Advancement Office, which I'll mention later on to just complete the picture. But other than that, the prior surveys were at least 10 years old. So for conducting this survey, as I said, this was conducted by Corona District staff. We designed a one-page survey form to simplify the reporting process and streamline the reporting. We requested essentially the fleet operators to provide to us the number of vehicles that they operated by vehicle type, by fuel type, by vocation, and we also, for heavy-duty vehicles, we asked for the model year ranges based on the effective date of the heavy-duty engine standard. And we also asked them to provide us the turnover rates to get an idea of how often the fleet operators replace their existing vehicles. The information that we're collecting in this survey can also be used to support our potential amendments to our existing fleet rules. As you recall, as part of the adoption of the SCAQMD, the board directed staff to seek additional legislative authority to that would authorize the district essentially to require the accelerated purchase and use of near zero and zero emission vehicles. Our current authority, excuse me, only allows us to require alternative fuels that are equivalent to methanol, whereas there are obviously advanced technologies available today, both in the near zero and zero emission categories, that are a lot more cleaner than methanol and the current alternative fuels like CNGs that are out there. So we have proposed legislative language, and Barbara can add to what I'm mentioning here, but we have proposed legislative language that has been approved by our board that would, if approved, would allow the district to amend our existing rules to require the purchase of cleanest commercially available vehicles. Again, we're affecting public fleets. And would also require the replacement of existing vehicles by up to 15% per year, with considerations given to the useful life of the vehicles and also the operational needs of the fleet operators. So that's the current proposed language, and I understand it's being considered in Sacramento right now. So we sent our survey form by email to 213 public entities made up of cities, counties, state agencies, special districts like water and sanitation districts, and transit agencies. We requested information on the vehicle categories in terms of whether they were light and medium duty vehicles, which are defined as less than 14,000 gross vehicle weight. And also for heavy duty vehicles, we asked for classification of heavy duty vehicles, specifically for sweepers, refuse collection, urban buses, transit vehicles, and what we call other heavy duty vehicles, which is a sort of a catch-all category which captures everything other than sweepers, refuse collections, and other categories that are specifically covered in our rules. And the other examples of the other heavy duty would be the utility and service vehicles, water trucks, boom trucks, vacuum trucks, and dump trucks. The response rate as of 2 weeks ago was 83%, which is great for any survey. We offered our assistance to cities and all various entities to fill out the survey forms, and really work closely with them and to get to the 83% level. Our goal is to get to 100% and get response from all cities, obviously. But so far we have a great response from all entities.
How many were sent out? Do we know?
Oh, I'm sorry. We sent surveys to 213 entities. 213 total public entities, which include the cities, counties, agencies, and special districts and transit agencies. So far we got about 180 responses. So here are the results. I'll cover the light duty fleet vehicles first. The slide shows the number of light duty fleet vehicles that we covered in our survey. You may not show in the bottom, but we had about 20,000 vehicles that are operated by the 83% cities that responded to us. As you see, almost 70%, a little bit over 70% of the vehicles are operated by gasoline vehicles, and the rest of them are about 18% hybrid, including plug-in hybrids, about 7% CNG, and 3% battery electric. So we're glad to see the penetration of hybrids and obviously electric and plug-in hybrids as well as CNGs in the light duty vehicle categories, which we believe at least completely or partially would be due to our public fleet rules. I would mention that when you look at the total light duty vehicle population in the Southwest District, that's about, as you know, it's a very high number, it's about 9 million. So our public fleet vehicles in the light duty category is about 20,000, which is about 0.2% of the entire light duty vehicle population. So it's not significant, and we realize that. Nevertheless, we see the opportunity to achieve further reductions from this sector if these vehicles transition to zero emission vehicles, which are available today, and also plug-in hybrids, which will provide additional reduction benefits. For the medium duty fleet vehicles, these would be smaller trucks, shuttle vans, and smaller service trucks or buses. The picture that we had was we had about 12,000 vehicles which we captured in our survey. The majority of, as was expected, was about 90% of them were powered by gasoline vehicles, another 6% by CNG, about 4% diesel, and a little bit, and others were about 1%. Again, when you look at the comparison of this sector to the total medium-duty population in the district, that's about 2 million. So the public fleet vehicles are about, again, less than 1%, would be about 0.5% of the total district-wide population of medium-duty vehicles. But again, we see the effect of our public fleet rules based on the CNGs that are operated out there. And again, as I mentioned, some of our rules, some of our fleet rules do allow for cleaner burning gasoline vehicles to also be deployed in the medium duty sector. For the heavy duty fleet vehicles, which covers several of our district rules, the total population of vehicles that were reported were about 18,000 heavy duty vehicles. Again, the picture looks pretty good mainly because we see over half of the vehicles that are CNGs, and again, alternative fuels, compressed natural gas or liquefied natural gas. This is again a great picture, and it's speaking of the effectiveness of our fleet rules, which require the purchase of alternative fuels for the heavy duty sector. Now the picture is a little bit better for the heavy duty vehicles when we compare the total heavy duty fleet vehicle population to the total heavy duty vehicle population in the district. That's about 8.5%, which is not insignificant. Again, that's based on 83% response rate. If we get the remainder of the cities to respond to our surveys, we think we would be closer to 10% of the total heavy duty vehicle population in the district, which is a significant number. But again, we are seeing that our fleet rules are making a difference, and a lot of the cities have already adapted to the use of alternative fuels, which I mentioned again in our next slide.
What's the total population of the heavy duty in the area?
These
Give that to me.
about 18,000. It's in the bottom of the corner.
Oh, that is,
No.
But the total is about 250,000.
okay.
Correct.
The 18,000 is the public, right?
18,000 is public. Total is about 250,000.
Okay.
the next slide provides a breakdown of the heavy-duty vehicle fleet vehicles by major classifications of heavy-duty vehicles. For sweepers, you'd note that, again, the green is all CNG and alternative fuel, so we see about 80% of our sweepers are CNGs and LNGs. The remainder is actually some LPGs and maybe a little bit of diesel. For refuse collection is also about 80% CNGs, maybe about 15% diesel, and what's called dual fuel, the blue sort of sliver is called dual fuel, and dual fuel vehicles are diesel engines that operate on alternative fuels, but they use diesel fuel for pilot injection. But majority, they use alternative fuels for the regular operation of the vehicle. When you switch over to urban buses, over 90% of them are CNGs, which is, again, a great story. Transit vehicles, another 60% of them are operated by CNGs or LNGs. When you look at the other heavy-duty vehicles, I apologize, you don't see the last bar graph. The picture there shows essentially the effectiveness or implementation of our Rule 1196 for other heavy-duty categories. These are, again, heavy-duty vehicles that provide various kinds of services to our cities and agencies, and they are specialized vehicles that provide these services. As you note, almost 40% of these vehicles are diesel, and that's highlighted by the gray portion of the bar. And there's still some, maybe about 20% are CNGs, and another, I would say 40% are gasoline vehicles. Our existing Rule 1196 allows new purchases to be either alternative fuels, gasoline, or dual fuel. And the reason I think for that was, again, to provide allowances for some of these special applications. And also, I should mention that one of the primary reasons of our fleet rules was to reduce air toxics emissions and obviously reduce the use of diesel vehicles as one of the primary reasons behind people adopting the regulation. So gasoline vehicles are also allowed to operate, and they're obviously much cleaner than diesel vehicles in terms of air toxics.
I have a question with the other HD vehicles. Given our rule, what are we looking forward in terms of percentage-wise to bring down the use of diesel and gasoline? Seems to me that we could be doing a better job there, obviously.
Yes, let me also mention, also as a follow-up to your question, the 40% diesel vehicles partly could be because of legacy fleets that were there before the rules were adopted. The other portion would be due to what we call the technical infeasibility demonstration requests that were submitted by cities and agencies, that they demonstrated to us that the alternative fuels were not technically or operationally feasible. So just a caveat as far as what that section of the heavy diesel vehicles includes. But given and provided that we obtain new legislative authority for amending our existing fleet rules, we could basically require additional, more stringent requirements that new purchases to be cleanest commercially available. As I mentioned, there's a proposed legislative language that would require new purchases to be cleanest commercially available, that would be defined by the board during the rule development process. I would also require the existing vehicles to be replaced at a rate of up to 15% per year, depending on the useful life and the operational needs of the vehicles. So that language is currently being considered, and if that is approved, it would give us the ability to amend our rules.
So just a clarification, in that column, the other HD vehicles, those are public agency vehicles, not
Yes.
private?
No, these are public agency vehicles, and also includes private contractors that provide services to public agencies under contractual or exclusive agreement.
Okay, so I am interested in seeing how we can get the private contractors to understand the urgency. And obviously, you know, the County of Los Angeles does a lot of contracting of different contractors, and they have their own fleets. I'm just wondering how, what more we can do to help incentivize that. And I'm sure we'll hear from your presentation, but I am concerned with that column. So, thank you.
Yes, I mean, in terms of incentives, again, Matt can refer to it. A number of cities have taken advantage of existing incentives under MSRC and Moyer to purchase a lot of these alternative fuels and also retrofit some of these diesel vehicles, which I'll mention a little bit later. The next slide shows the heavy-duty fleet vehicles by model year. We asked the heavy-duty fleet vehicle operators to provide the number of vehicles within ranges of model years. We didn't want to ask information on every specific truck or vehicle, again, to simplify the reporting process. But as you note, for CNGs, which primarily became available after 2000, majority of them are 2000 and newer, and there's a significant portion that are 2010 and newer. These are meeting the existing heavy-duty engine standards that are in the books. For gasoline vehicles, we see that pre-2007 vehicles are about 1/3 of the total population. Again, 2007 was the year where the PM engine standard took effect, 0.01 gram. So anything below 2007 would mean that the trucks are not meeting the 0.01 gram or the most stringent PM standard in the books. And the 2010 engine standard includes the most stringent NOx engine standard of 0.2 gram that we have currently in under the CARBs regulation. For diesel vehicles, as you know, a majority of them are older vehicles, pre-2007. As I mentioned, again, some of these are the legacy fleets that were grandfathered in our rules. Some of them could have been exempt under our TICR provision, and some of them could have been reported incorrectly. Actually, we're doing some follow-ups with some of the cities to make sure that they did not include their exempt vehicles like fire trucks or emergency vehicles. That's possible, but we want to make sure that they did not report that because we specifically asked them not to include those. But then again, the pre-2007 are still significant. Again, this shows, again, opportunity for us to achieve further reductions as you mentioned. In terms of turnover rates, obviously we do see a wide variation by vehicle category but almost for all of them, we see an average of 10 to 14 year turnover rates for all the vehicle categories. For the light duty vehicles, it's about 10 years, which means every 10 years, on average, they replace their existing vehicles. But the range really varies from almost 2 to 18 years, which really depends on the operational characteristics of each city, whether they're leasing, whether they're purchasing, and also whether some of these vehicles are what we call low-use vehicles that are not used extensively. So there's a wide range of useful lives for these vehicles. Similar situation for medium-duty vehicles, average of about 12 years. For heavy-duty vehicles, it looks like it's between 12 and 14 years. But the range, again, could vary. Again, as you note, for the other heavy-duty vehicles, it's from 10 to 25 years, which speaks of, again, the types of operations that some of these vehicles have, and it could include some of these low-use operations or specialized operations. And again, the diesel engines have long, useful lives, and they last a long time. And but again, this is interesting piece of information that we receive from our cities and agencies. In terms of the distribution of vehicles, whether they're whether the fleet vehicles are owned and operated specifically by public agencies versus their private contractors, that's about 75% to 25%. That was another interesting stat for heavy-duty vehicles. So in terms of general findings, I think I kind of covered it in the slides. For light-duty vehicles, we see a good penetration of hybrids and CNGs already. The gasoline vehicles are already pretty clean. When you look at the light-duty vehicle sector, all you can buy right now is ultra low-emission vehicles out there. So given that the turnover is about 10 years, a lot of the light-duty vehicles are pretty clean already. But then, as I mentioned, there are opportunities for them to transition to battery electric, fuel cells, and plug-in hybrids that would provide additional reduction benefits for us. Similar situation for medium-duty vehicles. 6% CNG, we think, is attributed to our fleet rules, sorry. But again, there's opportunities to transition to electric or low NOx technologies in this sector. We know that transit agencies are considering electric buses, and these technologies are very quickly becoming available in the medium-duty sector and also in the heavy-duty sector. For the heavy-duty fleet vehicles, again, besides significant penetration of alternative fuels, over half of them are alternative fuels, and the rest split between gasoline and diesel. As I mentioned, CNGs represent a significant portion of sweepers, refuse collection, urban buses, and transit vehicles already. Again, when we talked about CNGs at LNG, I should mention that these are the alternative fuels that meet the current heavy-duty engine standards. There are newer CNG vehicles, as you know, that are certified to be 90% cleaner, and what we call near-zero vehicles. So there are opportunities to deploy cleaner CNG vehicles, and given that there are already existing infrastructure by a lot of the cities and agencies, that seems to be a easy transition. But also, we also note that in some transit agencies, there's also a major push to go to electric vehicles, electric buses, and there are also rules in the proposed regulations by COP that would actually require complete transition to zero-emission vehicles for transit buses by 2035. Sorry. So those things are obviously are occurring right now. As you noted, diesel still accounts for a significant portion of other heavy-duty vehicles, about 40%, which is the remaining segment that we need to address, as well as the existing alternative fuels that could be cleaner. The older pre-2010 engines are about 50% of vehicles, which are still, again, provides opportunity for reductions. And as I mentioned, the average turnover is about 10 to 14 years with wide variabilities depending on the vehicle types. So I think that the picture or the message is that our fleet rules are working. They are effective. They are producing a lot of good results. We are seeing a lot of transition to alternative fuels based on our existing fleet rules. But we also see opportunities that if we get additional authority, we could amend our rules and we could require our public fleet operators to go even cleaner based on the advanced technologies that are becoming more and more available today. I also wanted to cover school buses that were not part of our survey. As I mentioned, this survey was done by our Science and Technology Advancement Office last December. Just to complete the picture, the survey that was conducted last year produced about 4,500 school buses, of which about 40% were natural gas and another 7% propane. So about almost half of them were alternative fuels. I should mention that since 2001, funding of about $280 million has been spent on either replacing school buses or retrofitting diesel buses with DPFs. I think 1,500 replacements and about 3,500 retrofits. which is obviously significant. Again, if you look at the total population of school buses, there are about 9,000 or 10,000 school buses in our district. This represents almost half of them. But again, we see opportunities to go even cleaner. I think we have, currently, based on our survey, we only had 2 electric school buses, if I understand based on this survey. If I understand that there's already funding approved for 33 electric buses that will be deployed by the end of the year.
Is it possible to get information on that slide, what school districts participate? Because LA Unified for us is the largest, but we have several other independent school districts that are in what I would call EJ communities, and would like to see what that looks like in terms of their participation.
I think survey covered 90 school districts, but we can provide a listing if you'd like, yes.
For LA County. Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And the next slide is again the information that was collected during the survey, and it's based on the number of school buses by model year. And the model year designation was consistent with the guidelines were available for incentives, so it wasn't quite consistent with the way we collected our information, but it was pre-87, 87 to 93, and 94 to 2000, and 2000 and cleaner. But just the takeaway from this slide is that there's still significant buses that are older than 2000, and there's again opportunities either for replacing existing buses with cleanest technologies available, going to ZEVs or low NOx school buses. So our next steps would be to continue working with the remaining entities to collect survey results. Again, as I mentioned, our goal is to achieve 100%, collect data from everyone. For the most part, everyone's been very cooperative. It's really been a matter of finding the right person in the right city and working with them to collect the information. And it's been a good cooperative effort with everyone. And we also look forward to hopefully obtaining additional legislation that would allow us to go back and amend our existing rules based on whatever is ultimately approved to see if we can accelerate the purchase and use of near zero and zero emission vehicles. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Zori. I have a question for Barbara or Mr. Nastri or Dr. Fine. Last board meeting, we passed some rules, the intent to basically make rules for fleets, especially at warehousing. Most of those warehousing will be basically importing, using medium-sized heavy-duty trucks. Were any of those surveyed as to determine exactly what numbers we would be looking at, with the understanding that, yes, we have the authority to basically issue rules for fleets? So with that being said, and the means by which we went about saying that it was time to basically make those rules, how are those going to fit into this overall matrix that we just saw about the number of trucks? Because I think we're talking about thousands of trucks that is going in and out of these particular facilities. Am I right or wrong in that assumption? One, do we have the authority to basically control fleets? Two, there's those numbers of projected numbers, were they included within this survey? And three, what effect will this have? Because it could. When I look at someone saying 8,000 or 9,000, I would think that we'll probably have that many going in and out of the warehouses that we're projecting on a daily basis.
So, Dr. Parker, let me take the first attempt at answering your question. So with regards to the indirect source rules for warehouses, unless the warehouse is owned by a municipality and the fleets that are going to that warehouse are owned or contracted by the municipality, they would not be affected. So the fleet rule that we're talking about today, which is under consideration, is primarily for public entities, so cities, and then those private fleets that contract with the public entity, like trash haulers. So with regards to the ISR and what we're doing now, unless that first provision that I described applied, it really wouldn't apply to that. So the authorities are different. We don't have the authority to do the private fleets on their own private business. And Barbara, I think that was actually litigated all the way to the Supreme Court,
Yes,
the state Supreme Court.
well, no, that was actually the
US.
California, the US Supreme Court. So, Dr. Parker, the basic distinction is between a rule that directly affects fleets, which is what we're talking about here in what Mr. Nastri has mentioned. We have the authority only to regulate fleets that are owned or under contract to state and local agencies because there is a Clean Air Act preemption that applies to regulation of private fleets. However, the California Supreme Court and the Ninth Circuit have upheld a San Joaquin Valley Air District rule that applies to what we call indirect sources. And that is, for example, warehouses are a type of indirect sources. So the Ninth Circuit Federal Court of Appeals distinguished that situation from a fleet rule and said that we can regulate those indirect sources, so warehouses, and that's what the staff will be considering pursuant to the board's direction this year. So the answer to whether trucks coming to warehouses were included in the survey is no, they were not, because this is for public fleets. As far as how many warehouse trucks there are, I don't know. Perhaps staff knows whether we have an estimate on that.
Yeah, I mean, we as we said earlier, there's about 250,000 total heavy-duty trucks in service. I would assume that a pretty substantial fraction of that service warehouses, but maybe Zora can fill that in.
I think that's one area that we don't have a good handle on the number of trucks that visit our warehouses. As Bill mentioned, on a total heavy-duty vehicles are about 250,000. If you look at the heavy-duty sector that are 33,000 pounds or greater, that's about 100,000 trucks. How many of them go to our warehouses? We don't have a good handle on that. I think that's one of the areas that we need to conduct additional surveys and obtain additional information. But we think it's significant, obviously.
I thought we had agreed that we were going to use the national standard by the highway, the transportation agency that produces the number of ins and out vehicles per day by square footage. Did we not? Because at one time I remember we said we had our own standards and we were not using the national standards.
So, Dr. Parker, those standards are, if you are building a warehouse or you have a warehouse, it's what your assumptions are in terms of how many truck trips that generates. So that would be kind of a bottom-up estimate we could probably make, but there's probably other ways we can get at that number through some top-down estimates and the types of fleets that exist. So there's a couple ways to get at it. That's one way, but there might be some other ways we can get at the number.
We think the survey tools are actually probably much more accurate than using those estimates. And so gathering the additional data that Zora talked about, I think is key for us to understand as we move through rule development language, or I should say rule development concepts that we would bring back to the board for further consideration.
Well, I know that, as the rules are, I only speak for myself as a committee member and a board member, but I know that Mayor McClellan has stated that he didn't believe that we should be basically making indirect source rules, as a matter of his own principled belief. That being said, the board has directed staff to go forward in looking at this, and I think that we should really get some kind of numbers, and I'd like to see that be brought back to our committee as soon as possible as to what impact that is going to really have. Where is the largest concentration itself of the pollutants going to be coming from? We always talk about what's going up and down the 710 freeway coming out of the ports, but we really don't talk about what's going through some of these other sources that can be very significant. So I'd like to ask you to, as soon as you can, at least, update us on what those numbers themselves will be and what effect they would have on the overall pollution problems that we're experiencing, especially for those heavy-duty trucks, because those are the ones where we're having the real biggest problem of meeting our attainment stuff for NOx. Am I right in that area that that's where our largest challenge is?
Yes, Dr. Parker, and it is our intent to come back to you, this committee, before going back to the full board, and as the board directed, it's to provide further information along the lines of questions that you're asking. So we hope to provide that information to you as we progress.
Okay. Any further questions by any of our other colleagues?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Supervisor Solis, on your question there, is there anything that prohibits us from conducting a survey directed at the truckers that come into the ports, because that's where I believe the greatest number that you're describing are found? Is there anything that would prohibit us from doing some kind of survey?
Don't look at that.
To our
I'm going
extent,
to have to pass that along to
Supervisor
Ms. Nash.
To our
I can't hear you.
To our understanding, Supervisor Solis, there's no prohibition on us conducting that kind of survey. I mean, that's the kind of information, obviously, that we need to have as we move forward, again, with the warehouse concepts. So we'll be certain to bring that information back.
And I would also add on another note, though, on school buses, I am very interested in what programs are available for areas that are impacted heavily by contaminants, air pollution. I noticed that we do have buses that we have provided air filters for, that we just approved, but it's very limited. And I'd like to get a better idea of how expansive the program has been or not, and perhaps identifying areas that really are underserved and could use some incentive. And I'm thinking about places like in Montebello School District, which is an independent school district. We have large school districts, even as far as Pomona Valley, where air pollution is very bad, and what kind of incentives we have going there with the school districts and outreach, because we know those are our hot spots to begin with.
So there are a number of programs, and George, do you want to describe some of those? And I have another concept, or do you want to have Matt do that?
I just want to mention, first of all, that the school buses are currently subject to CARB regulation, meaning that all of them actually by now are required to have DPFs. We had provided incentive funding for almost 3,500 DPFs in the prior years, but in terms of installing diesel particulate filters, again, my understanding is that by now every school bus has to have a DPF on board. But there are incentives available for replacing the existing school buses with either electric or CNG type buses. And then Matt, if you want to.
How do you verify that, compliance with the schools? How do you verify that? Is it self-reported or something?
It's a combination of self-report and a certain amount of auditing that goes on. We do that. CARB reviews our numbers. But in answer to your earlier question about the number of different programs that are available, Matt, do you want to talk about that? I was going to talk about 617. So let me talk about that first, and then if there's anything you can add, that would be great. So under Somerville 617, particularly within the disadvantaged communities, we have to identify sources of risk. The development of AB 617, our position was that the biggest driver of risk in the disadvantaged communities are the mobile sources, particularly the heavy-duty diesel. And as a result of that, what we had argued was that in order to reduce risk, the quickest way to do so would be through the Carl Moyer program or a Carl Moyer type program. And so concurrent with the development of AB 617, you had 134, AB 134, which authorized last year 250 million statewide. Our portion of that was 107.5, 108 million. So those funds will be used to, in essence, reduce emissions, and we can look at all different types of areas and sources within those disadvantaged communities. Just a few weeks ago, we submitted the initial list of communities that are under consideration for AB 617. It was a total of roughly 53, 55 in that area. Some of those communities were self-nominated. I want to say it was 17, or it was about 17 communities that were self-nominated. We will be going over the next 2 months prioritization. If you look at the program from the state perspective, the state anticipates a total of 10 projects for the first year. And then in answer to sort of the ongoing aspect, what we've been very engaged in lately and what the Senate just did yesterday was approve enhanced funding under 617. Last year it was 250 million. The Senate just approved 360 million, 310, which is obviously a 60 million increase from last year, which is a good thing. We were obviously pushing for more. The other aspect associated with that was that there was a $50 million allocation for the implementation, which we had been arguing for. So that's positive. Our understanding is that the Assembly will adopt that as well. So we should have additional funds that we can go, particularly in those disadvantaged communities. And obviously looking at the schools will be a big component in terms of the fleets and the impacts within those communities. There are other programs that are also available to schools, and Matt, maybe you could add to that.
Yes, so Supervisor, your board just approved close to 250 awards for school buses at the previous board meeting, and as Zorak had mentioned, there was another award earlier this year for 33 electric school buses. So on average, we come to your board about every year and a half to approve school bus funds. It's through our AB 923 program, or if we get, in this case, the last month, we got a targeted airshed grant from the US EPA. So that's an ongoing program, and you'll see we're chipping away at getting the older school buses off the road. To your other question about air filters, we come to your board whenever we get the typically SEP funding, so Supplemental Environmental Project funding through the EPA, ARB, or others. And we do look for, we're targeting schools that are right on roadways, so we'll be happy to look at the ones in Montebello or Pomona that you mentioned, because those are the ones that are most highly impacted by the diesel particulate, and that's the technology that the filters are most efficient at removing. So, but we're happy to look at any of the schools that are in any of the 4 counties that may be impacted.
And Matt, when you say your board, LA County Supervisor Board or the governing board?
Our board.
Okay, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
But we'd be happy if your board takes up the cost as well.
All right, thank you. I just want to, lastly, just to share some information along the 710 Freeway South. Many of the independent truckers that come in and out of our ports, highly immigrant population that are independent contractors, they own their trucks. I'd really like to encourage us to start doing more outreach in these areas so that we can identify who these independent truckers are and really work with them. And many of them bring their trucks right back into the areas that are most heavily polluted. They live there. So, I mean, we're chasing our tail here, and I think we need to do a better job about really defining how we go after this. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor. I would just add that ARB is also well aware of this issue, and the concern is particularly in light of 617 like you said, the small independent operators. And a lot of our outreach meetings that we've had, particularly like in Wilmington and near the ports, this very issue has come up. And we've actually had a number of drivers come to those meetings and ask about the funding and how they might be able to qualify. There will be challenges
You need-
in qualifying for those, but
Right,
we're continuing to
right.
do that.
And I understand. I'm just saying that beyond just Wilmington and San Pedro, you got to think about places like Commerce,
Yep.
Vernon, the surrounding areas there where a lot of the residents live. So I would urge us to do that. Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Nastry, what percentage of the new 60 million will probably be directed to our district?
That's a very good question, Dr. Parker. We tried to be a little bit more inclusive from the state, but the two conditions that we laid down was that they had to be driven by population and they had to be driven by attainment status. So given that, we would get the lion's share. I would say at a minimum, it would be 43%, which is what the allocation was that we received last year. But our argument is that we should have more because we have a greater challenge and a greater need.
Good.
Dr. Parker,
Any further questions by any?
We have
Yes.
a public comment here, Dr. Parker.
Well, let's get our
Oh, I'm
questions
sorry.
in first.
I'm sorry, Mayor
I think
Pro Tem.
Larry and I may have some comments too, if we could. Larry, go ahead.
Well, first of all, as far as the indirect source rules go, I would hope that the staff remembers that Bruce County put forward several items, and as you come forward with your proposals, that those are considered.
Absolutely. And that's why I said concepts,
Yeah.
mayors, because it was very clear that we need to come back, provide greater information before moving ahead on rule language. So it is more information, like you said, and we are aware of that.
Okay, getting back now to what we're supposed to be talking about, which is public fleets. The light and medium duty vehicles are insignificant in public fleets, is that correct?
Compared to the total district, they are very small portion.
So if we totally regulate all of those, what kind of reductions are we talking that we would get? Is it gonna be a drop in the bucket?
Well, for light and medium duty vehicles, they account for about 0.5% of the light and medium duty population. Emission wise, I think they are in, if you consider 0.1 tons per day insignificant, they are insignificant in the overall picture.
I would just add though, Mayor, that while they may be insignificant now, there are certain things that we have to be cognizant of. First is that the federal government is moving to relax certain standards. And so we want to make sure that by having the cleanest commercially available, that one is we try to obviously improve, but also we don't want to see backsliding, particularly in the mobile sector.
But I think our current rules are achieving what we want to achieve, and if you squeeze down more on these light and medium duty vehicles, cities like mine would have to expend a lot more money and money for infrastructure that we don't have, trying to meet these fleet rules. And I just don't think it's worth the expense for a city like mine to be able to go after that. So I'm not sure that we need to expand the current rules in the light and medium duty area. I think we're doing good in the heavy duty area. I know our refuse fleet that service us is all CNG, and I think all of our vehicles in those areas are. But you know, we just purchased, for instance, a pickup truck in our city. And one thing I asked our city manager is it, you know, CNG or is it electric? And he said, no, because it would cost X number of dollars more if we went that way. So I offer that out as a reason that, hey, let's not go after something that you know, we're squeezing on the rock and we're gonna get maybe a little dropout, when it's really gonna hurt small and medium-sized cities. Also, on the heavy-duty area, we talked about the other as being something that, and what percentage of the total heavy-duty fleet is the other category?
What percent? So it's about 7,000 out of 18,000.
So it is
That's about
significant.
significant, yes.
Do you have it in terms of NOx emissions as well?
Um,
Yeah, that-
yes. So for, which are you talking about just the other
Yeah, the
category?
other,
The other category, we did a very rough estimate of what the emissions would be, and we think on average, if you use the average emission factor from the CARB's MFAC emission model, it would be about 2 tons per day, which is significant.
Out of a total of 5 tons per day of all the heavy
If you
duty.
include everyone.
Well, I just wanted to get that because Supervisor Solis brought up the other
Right.
category, and it appears like it's an area that may be fruitful to look at.
So Mayor, to your first question, we'll be coming back to this committee as we look through the fleet rules. And as we just said, if the light duty and medium duty is 0.1 ton per day and the total, and the heavy duty is 5 tons per day, obviously we'll be prioritizing to get the biggest bang for the resources we can get to it. So we'll be coming back to the committee.
Yeah, don't squeeze down on my city to get a drop when it would cost me that much money to.
Cost effectiveness is always part of it.
So, Mr. Chair,
Okay.
if I could,
Go right ahead.
our rules affect public fleets that are 50 or more vehicles. So we can even work with that too, if we think it's gonna hurt smaller cities, can we? Or what's the situation with respect to the size of fleets?
It was the pleasure of the committee to do 15
We changed it. You originally had it
last year.
at a much smaller number, and
And we
we
expanded it.
we expanded to 50.
So we have that discretion.
So Mayor Mitchell, are you asking what, obviously in the rulemaking, the board can decide to not go all the way down to 15 if they decided that a higher number would be appropriate.
But that
We
was
just
my
can't
question.
below
What-
50.
Yeah, we have discretion to
Yes.
change that as well.
My only concern is proposed legislation.
Yeah, the
Because we're
legislation.
running with legislation based on
15.
the
15.
15, right?
Right.
But as Barbara said, it's during the rulemaking that we wouldn't have to do it. We would just have that authority, so it's still the board's discretion.
The other question I have is, if we embark on rulemaking that goes to a cleaner standard, how will it affect the ability to obtain Carl Moyer funds? Carl Moyer is available to vehicles that are going cleaner than the standard. So if we increase the standard and go to a higher standard, can we still get Carl Moyer?
We're not
Or is-
establishing a standard though, right? So it's a purchase requirement. And so in the legislation, we would say purchase the cleanest available technology. And the cleanest available currently is below the standard, so we would still be able to incentivize it.
So it wouldn't affect
It
that
wouldn't
at all?
affect it.
Okay.
Yeah, also for replacements, there is no existing CARB regulation that would be existing heavy-duty vehicles to be anything cleaner than the 0.2 gram standard.
Mhm.
So if you were to require the near zero or zero emissions, that would be provisions for allowing incentives.
So it wouldn't affect the Carl Moyer gap funding, basically, to, fill in that gap between what your pickup truck costs to go to a cleaner one. And then on heavy-duty trucks, I know at CARB, when this came up for discussion, some of the heavy-duty trucks in the state are really, really old. I mean, they're older than 25 years. So that's a big project to clean up heavy-duty trucks in the state. Just a comment. And CARB is looking pretty closely at school buses now, particularly diesel school buses, because you have your kids riding around in diesel school buses, which is probably one of the worst health impacts that we can experience. But we also have a lot of rural school districts up in the other parts of the state that are all diesel school buses. So there is kind of more of an emphasis to hone in on those right now rather than down here in the South Coast. Just, but we are getting some money for school buses, so we should be taking a look at those heavily impacted areas where we're looking at school buses.
And Mayor, I would just add that under the VW settlement, there's also
That's right.
a lot of funding that'll be for school buses.
That's right. Then, this is just for sort of my education, and Matt can educate me on this. For diesel, there's talk about clean diesel, biodiesel. What is the sort of status on that now for diesel trucks?
So there are, well, there's biodiesel, which is from like fatty acids and other feedstocks. There's renewable diesel, which is further refined, and they actually have different NOx emissions, right? So biodiesel tends to have an increase in the older engines for NOx, so we don't like biodiesel. We prefer renewable diesel, which will tend to have a lower NOx in the older engines. So we're actually looking at testing renewable diesel in off-road equipment, marine vessels, others, to see if we can get, you know, the NOx decrease is modest. It's up to 8%, maybe even over 10%. But if that's the only thing you can do in some of these bigger engines, it's worth looking at. So there is no really clean fuel product that can reduce emissions drastically, and that's why we're looking at different engine technologies as well as reducing diesel emissions from the engine itself. So that's a project we have ongoing with Air Resources Board.
Okay, thank you, that's all. That's all for me. But we do have some comments here, I think, Dr. Parker, from some people in the audience.
You're on mute, Dr. Parker.
Okay, please go right ahead and give us your name for the record, please.
Thank you, Dr. Parker and committee members. Peter Whittingham Public Affairs Advisors, appearing today on behalf of Creative Bus Sales, which is based just over the hill in Chino. Certainly to committee member and board member Mitchell's comments and Supervisor Solis's comments earlier. Back in early 2000s when CARB established the lower emission school bus program, which 1195 criteria followed, there were no school buses other than the ones under 14,000 pounds, the smaller ones, that ran on gasoline. Everything was diesel. So when that program was established, gasoline wasn't considered as a viable choice for grant funding. Fast forward to today, there's actually 2 gasoline-powered school bus engines that are between 14,000 and 35,000 gross vehicle weight. And one of those actually beats the CNG and LNG engines for NOx standard. They're actually 0.04 grams per brake horsepower NOx, which is far superior to the 0.2 NOx. And so we are reaching out to CARB certainly to hope that they can amend the criteria for the grant program. So just to allow school districts to potentially purchase those gasoline powered vehicles, which again addresses, Mayor McCallum, your issues in terms of infrastructure and what have you, put those out on the road, replacing those older, dirtier diesel buses. And hopefully, certainly the district's support for that when that comes forward would be profound. So just wanted to share that with the committee today. Appreciate the time. Thank
Peter, I
you.
just asked if you guys could get data on that as well.
Absolutely, definitely would.
Has it received the voluntary certification?
Yes,
from
yes.
CAR? At .04?
Yeah, I'll get that to you as well. Yes. Great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Whittingham. Any further questions from anyone? I know we are about approaching our time before the other committee is supposed to start. Any further questions or comments?
No comments.
Any public comments from your areas, Supervisor?
Nothing from Riverside.
Nothing here, Dr. Parker.
All righty. Dr. Fine, you have written reports. Any questions concerning the written reports by anyone? Hearing none, I will order those to be received and filed. And any other matters itself of other business that we should be taking care of. Hearing none, then I will call this meeting adjourned, and we'll see you on June 15th at our next meeting. Thank you very much.
See you then.
Everyone have a nice weekend.
Yeah.
You too.